The rain fell in relentless sheets, soaking Min Nguyen's suit as he stood at the edge of his mother's grave. His heart thundered louder than the storm, each beat a reminder of the life he'd spent trying to please her. Now, she was gone, and the weight of her expectations still crushed him. Min's fingers trembled as he clutched the damp funeral program, the ink smearing under his touch. Around him, relatives whispered, their eyes darting between him and his husband, Jamal Carter, who stood like a sentinel at his side. Min had always been the family's golden child, the one who paid for everything: medical bills, rent, even his cousin's college tuition, because that's what good sons did. But today, as the casket lowered, he felt like a stranger in his own life. Growing up in Oakland's vibrant but tough Chinatown, Min had learned early that love came with a price. His mother, Lynn, had fled Vietnam in the 70s, carrying nothing but her dreams and a fierce determination to rebuild. She'd poured those dreams into Min, her only child, expecting him to be the family's savior. "You're our future," she'd say, her voice sharp with hope. By 16, Min was working 2 jobs to help cover the rent. By 25, he was a software engineer at a San Francisco tech startup, wiring money to his mother, aunts, and cousins without question. They called him their family ATM, a nickname that stung like a slap, but one he accepted because it meant he was needed. When Min met Jamal at a community art gallery in the Mission District, everything changed. Jamal, a painter with a laugh that could light up a room, saw Min for who he was: not a bank account, but a man with dreams of his own. Their first date was at a hole-in-the-wall taco joint, where Jamal teased Min for overanalyzing the menu. "Just pick something, man," Jamal had said, his brown eyes sparkling. "Life's too short to optimize tacos." Min fell hard, and within a year, they were married in a small ceremony at City Hall, surrounded by a handful of friends who became their chosen family. But Min's biological family didn't celebrate. Lynn refused to attend the wedding, calling it a phase. His aunts and uncles, who'd happily cashed his checks, sent passive-aggressive texts about tradition. Only his cousin Trin, a free-spirited barista, showed up, sneaking Min a bottle of champagne and a hug that felt like home. The rejection cut deep, but Min kept sending money, hoping one day they'd see him as more than a wallet. Now, standing at the funeral, Min felt the weight of those years. The whispers grew louder as Jamal's hand tightened around his. "You okay?" Jamal murmured, his voice a low anchor in the storm. Min nodded, but his chest ached. He'd paid for this funeral: every flower, every chair, every hymn, yet his family barely acknowledged him. His Aunt Mai, who'd once borrowed 10 grand for a business venture that never materialized, shot him a cold glance. His Uncle Tuan, who'd lived rent-free in Min's old apartment, didn't even meet his eyes. The pastor's voice droned on about Lynn's selfless life, but Min's mind drifted to the last time he'd seen her. It was 6 months ago, in her cramped Oakland apartment, where she'd berated him for not visiting enough. "You're too busy with that man," she'd spat, refusing to say Jamal's name. Min had wanted to scream, to tell her how much it hurt to be reduced to a paycheck, but he'd stayed silent, as always. He'd left her a check for $5,000 and walked away, promising himself he'd stop. But he never did. As the casket disappeared into the earth, Min's knees buckled. Jamal caught him, his strong arms a lifeline. "I've got you," Jamal whispered, and for a moment, Min believed he could survive this. But then Aunt Mai stepped forward, her voice cutting through the rain. "Min, we need to talk about the estate. Your mother left debts. You'll handle it, right?" Min froze. Debts. Lynn had never mentioned debts. He'd paid her bills religiously, even when it meant dipping into his and Jamal's savings. Jamal's jaw tightened, but before Min could respond, Trin pushed through the crowd, her short hair dripping wet. "Are you serious?" She snapped at Mai. "He's grieving, and you're already asking for money." The crowd hushed. Mai's face reddened, but she doubled down. "He's the eldest son. It's his duty." "Duty?" Trin scoffed. "You've been bleeding him dry for years." Min's heart raced. No one had ever stood up for him like this, not even himself. But before he could speak, Jamal stepped forward, his voice calm but razor sharp. "Enough. Min's not your ATM anymore." The words hung in the air, electric and dangerous. Min's relatives gasped, their murmurs rising like a swarm of bees. Jamal's eyes burned with a fire Min had rarely seen, a protective fury that made Min's chest swell with love and fear. This was the moment everything could break. Min took a shaky breath, his mind spiraling. He'd spent his life trying to earn his family's love, but had he ever had it? And if he stopped paying, would they disappear entirely? The rain stung his face as he looked at Jamal, whose steady gaze said, "You're enough." For the first time, Min wondered if he could believe it. The cemetery was a blur of black umbrellas and accusing eyes as Min and Jamal walked away from the grave. Min's shoes squelched in the mud, each step heavier than the last. He could still hear Aunt Mai's voice, sharp and entitled, demanding he handle his mother's debts. Jamal's arm around his shoulders was the only thing keeping him upright. Back at their small San Francisco apartment, Min collapsed onto the couch, the funeral program crumpled in his hand. Jamal knelt in front of him, his painter's hands calloused from years of wielding brushes gently prying the paper away. "Talk to me," Jamal said, his voice soft but insistent. Min shook his head, the words stuck in his throat. How could he explain the shame of being used, the guilt of wanting to say no, the fear that without his money, he'd lose what little family he had left? Jamal stood, pacing the room. Their apartment was a patchwork of their lives, Jamal's vibrant canvases on the walls, Min's coding books stacked on the coffee table. It was their sanctuary, but tonight it felt like a cage. "They don't get to do this to you," Jamal said, his voice rising. "You've given them everything, your money, your time, your damn heart. And they still want more." Min flinched. "It's not that simple," he whispered. "They're my family. I owe them." "You owe them." Jamal stopped, his eyes blazing. "Min, you've paid for their lives while they've barely acknowledged yours. They didn't even come to our wedding." His voice cracked, and Min saw the hurt beneath his anger. Jamal had his own scars growing up black and queer in Atlanta. He'd fought for every scrap of acceptance. He'd built a life where love didn't come with conditions, and he couldn't understand why Min let his family treat him like a transaction. Min's phone buzzed, breaking the tension. It was a text from Uncle Tuan. "Need to discuss Mom's house. Meet tomorrow." Min's stomach churned. His mother's house in Oakland, a modest 2-bedroom she'd bought with Min's help, was the last thing tying him to his childhood. He'd assumed it was paid off, but Tuan's text hinted at more surprises. He showed the message to Jamal, who shook his head. "Don't go alone," Jamal said. "I'm coming with you." The next day, they drove to Oakland, the Bay Bridge stretching before them like a line between past and present. The meeting was at a dim sum restaurant, a place Min's family had gathered for years. Tuan sat at a round table with Aunt Mai and 2 cousins, their faces a mix of grief and calculation. Min's heart sank as he realized Trin wasn't there. Eshed always been his ally, the one who saw through the family's greed. Tuan didn't waste time. The house has a second mortgage, he said, pushing a stack of papers toward Min. Your mom took it out last year. 50 grand. You'll need to cover it. Min's breath caught. $50,000. He'd been sending his mother money every month. How could she have done this without telling him? Jamal's hand found his under the table, a silent reminder to breathe. Why wasn't I told? Min asked, his voice barely audible. Mai shrugged. She didn't want to worry you. You're good at fixing things, Min. Her tone was matter of fact, as if his role as the family's problem solver was a given. Min's mind reeled. He'd sacrificed vacations, savings, even his and Jamal's dream of buying a house, all to keep his family afloat. And now this. Jamal leaned forward, his voice steady but laced with steel. Min's not a bank. You can't just keep taking. Tuan's eyes narrowed, and Mai's lips pursed. The cousins shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. Min felt the air thicken, the weight of their expectations pressing down. He wanted to scream, to walk away, but the thought of losing his family, flawed as they were, kept him rooted. That night, Min couldn't sleep. He sat at their kitchen table, staring at the mortgage documents. Jamal joined him, setting down 2 mugs of tea. You don't have to do this, Jamal said. You can say no. Min's eyes burned. If I say no, they'll hate me. I'll have no one left. You have me, Jamal said, his voice fierce. You have Trin. You have our friends. You're not alone, Min, even if they make you feel like you are. Min wanted to believe him, but the fear was a knot in his chest. He'd spent his life trying to be enough for his mother, his family, the world. But what if he stopped? What if he chose himself? The thought was terrifying, but as he looked at Jamal, he felt a flicker of courage. Maybe, just maybe, he could rewrite his story. The next morning, Min woke to a voicemail from Trin. Meet me at the cafe, she said, her voice urgent. We need to talk about the family. I found something. Min's pulse quickened. Trin had always been the one to call out the family's nonsense, but her tone suggested something bigger. He and Jamal drove to her favorite coffee shop in Oakland, a cozy spot with mismatched chairs and the smell of roasted beans. Trin was waiting at a corner table, her laptop open and a stack of papers beside her. Her eyes were red, like she hadn't slept. Min, she said, sliding a folder toward him. You need to see this. Inside were bank statements, loan documents, and email evidence that Lin had been funneling Min's money to Mai and Tuan for years. Not just for bills, but for personal expenses, Mai's new car, Tuan's gambling debts. Min's hands shook as he read. His mother had lied to him, used him, and his aunts and uncles had been complicit. How did you get this? Min asked, his voice hoarse. I went through Mom's files after the funeral, Trin said. She kept everything. Min, they've been playing you. They knew you'd never say no. Jamal's jaw clenched, but he stayed silent, letting Min process. Min felt like the ground had vanished beneath him. He'd thought his sacrifices were for his mother's survival, for the family's legacy. But they'd been a scam, a betrayal dressed up as duty. Why didn't she tell me? He whispered. Trin's eyes softened. She was scared of losing you. But she was also scared of them. Mai and Tawanthi pressured her. She felt trapped. Min's anger flared, but beneath it was a deeper hurt. His mother had chosen their demands over his trust. He looked at Jamal, who nodded slightly, as if to say, You're not alone in this. Min took a deep breath. I'm done, he said, the words feeling foreign but liberating. No more money. Trin grinned, a spark of her usual fire returning. Good. But they won't let go easily. We need a plan. Over the next week, Min, Jamal, and Trin dug deeper. They met with a lawyer, a sharp woman named Elena, who specialized in family disputes. Elena confirmed the second mortgage was real, but suggested Min wasn't legally obligated to pay it. Your mother's estate is responsible, she said. You can walk away. The idea was dizzying freedom from the financial leash, but also from the family he'd spent his life trying to hold together. When Min told Mai and Tuan he wouldn't cover the debt, the fallout was immediate. Mai called, her voice venomous. You're abandoning us. After everything we've done for you. Tuan sent a text, you're no son of ours. Each word was a knife. But Jamal was there, reading the messages with him, reminding him that their love wasn't real if it came with a price tag. The family's reaction spread like wildfire. Cousins Min had supported for years unfriended him on social media. Aunts spread rumors that he'd turned his back on his heritage. At a community event in Chinatown, Min overheard whispers about his disloyalty. The shame was suffocating, but Jamal and Trin became his shield. Jamal painted a portrait of Min, his face radiant against a stormy background, and hung it in their living room. This is who you are, Jamal said. Not their puppet. One night, Min found an old photo of him and his mother at a Tet festival, both smiling under paper lanterns. He traced her face, wondering when their love had become so transactional. Jamal sat beside him, quiet but present. She loved you, Jamal said. But she didn't know how to show it without hurting you. Min nodded, tears falling. He was grieving not just his mother, but the version of her he'd hoped for. Yet, in that grief, he felt something new: anger. Yes, but also resolve. He wasn't just the family ATM. He was Min Nguyen, a man with a husband who loved him, a cousin who fought for him, and a life he could finally claim as his own. The weeks that followed were a storm of their own. Min's decision to cut off financial support unleashed a torrent of guilt trips and threats. Aunt Mai showed up at his office, demanding he reconsider for the sake of family honor. Uncle Tuan left voicemails, each one angrier than the last, accusing Min of betraying his mother's memory. Even distant relatives Min barely knew sent emails, painting him as the villain who'd abandoned his roots. Each attack chipped away at his resolve, but Jamal and Trin were relentless in their support. One evening, Min and Jamal attended a gallery opening for Jamal's latest work, a series of paintings about identity and resistance. The crowd was a mix of San Francisco's queer community, artists, and allies, their warmth a stark contrast to Min's family's coldness. As Min watched Jamal charm the room, he felt a pang of pride. This was the life they'd built together, a life where love didn't demand sacrifice. But the peace was short-lived. A week later, Min received a letter from a collection agency. His mother's second mortgage had gone unpaid, and now the bank was threatening to foreclose on the Oakland house. Min's first instinct was to pay it, to make the problem disappear like he always had. But Jamal stopped him. This isn't your burden, he said. Let them figure it out. Min hesitated. The house held memories, good ones, like cooking pho with his mother, and painful ones, like her refusing to meet Jamal. Letting it go felt like losing her all over again. But as he looked at Jamal, he realized holding onto the house meant holding onto the pain. He called Elena, who helped him draft a letter to the bank, stating he wasn't responsible for the debt. It was a small act, but it felt like a revolution. The family's response was predictable. Mai organized a family meeting at a community center, inviting everyone but Min and Trin. Through a mutual friend, Min learned they discussed selling the house and splitting the proceeds without including him. The betrayal stung, but it also clarified something. His family didn't love him. They loved what he could provide. Trin, ever the strategist, suggested they fight back. "Let's go public," she said. "Tell your story. They're counting on your silence." Min was hesitant. Tearing family drama felt like a betrayal of his own. But Jamal agreed with Trin. "You've been carrying their shame," he said. "It's time they carry their own." With Trin's help, Min wrote a blog post titled "The Cost of Duty." He poured out his story, the years of financial support, the emotional toll, the discovery of his mother's lies. He wrote about Jamal, his rock, and Trin, his truth teller. The post went viral in the Bay Area's queer and Asian American communities, sparking conversations about family expectations and boundaries. Strangers reached out, sharing similar stories. Min realized he wasn't alone. The backlash from his family was swift. Mai called him disgraceful. Tuan threatened to sue. But for every hateful message, there were 10 from people who understood: queer kids disowned by their families, immigrants pressured to carry their parents' dreams. Min's inbox became a lifeline, a reminder that family could be chosen, not just inherited. One night, as Min and Jamal lay in bed, Min whispered, "I'm scared I'll lose them forever." Jamal pulled him close. "You're not losing family," he said. "You're finding yourself." Min clung to those words, letting them anchor him as he faced the final chapter of his mother's legacy. The day of the estate hearing arrived, a cold morning in a San Francisco courthouse. Min sat beside Elena, his hands clasped tightly. Jamal and Trin were in the gallery, their presence a quiet strength. Across the room, Mai and Tuan sat with their lawyer, their faces set in defiance. The house was the last piece of Lynn's legacy, and today would decide its fate. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes, reviewed the documents. Min's heart pounded as Elena argued his case. Min had no legal obligation to pay the second mortgage, as it was taken out without his knowledge. Mai's lawyer countered, claiming Min had implied consent by supporting the family for years. The argument felt like a dissection of Min's life, each word exposing the wounds he'd hidden. When it was Min's turn to speak, he stood, his voice unsteady at first. "I love my mother," he began. "I thought paying for everything was how I showed it. But I see now that love shouldn't cost me my life." He glanced at Jamal, who nodded, his eyes shining. "I'm done being the family ATM. I choose my husband, my future, myself." The courtroom was silent. Mai's face crumpled, but Tuan looked away. The judge ruled in Min's favor. The house would be sold to cover the debt, and Min was free of responsibility. As they left the courthouse, Trin hugged him fiercely. "You did it," she whispered. Jamal took his hand, and for the first time in months, Min felt light. The aftermath wasn't easy. Most of his family cut contact, their silence louder than their demands had ever been. But Min found new connections, friends who celebrated his courage, communities that embraced him and Jamal. He and Trin grew closer, their bond a bridge between past and present. Jamal's art flourished, his paintings now carrying a new depth, inspired by their shared journey. One evening, a year later, Min and Jamal stood in their new home, a small fixer-upper they'd bought with their own savings. The walls were bare, waiting for Jamal's paintings, for their future. Min held up the old Tet Festival photo, now framed. "I miss her," he said, his voice steady. "But I don't miss who I was." Jamal kissed his forehead. You're enough, Min. You always were. The story didn't end with a grand reconciliation or a tidy resolution. Min's family remained distant, their love conditional on what he could give. But Min had found something better, a life where love was freely given, where he was seen, not used. At his mother's funeral, Jamal had stood for him, and now Min stood for himself, a man no longer defined by duty, but by the courage to love and be loved in return.